there is some, I'll say, kind of nervousness about discussing this, the untimely death of this young man on the screen behind me. His name was Andre. He was a 16-year-old boy who had also been diagnosed with moderate autism. His death came untimely. And we're going to discuss the details. I'm not going to sit here and agree necessarily straightforward with the title of this article, Perfectly Healthy 16-Year-Old Boy, or 16-year-old who loved photography and video games, died suddenly from COVID-19. While COVID-19 or coronavirus or any virus may have had a contributing factor in the role of this individual, this child's death, I think there could have been things that we could have done to maybe save his life. And I pray and hope that, God's kind of showed me this information. I was literally ready to delete this. I wasn't going to talk about it. I've seen other people share this article recently and just kind of try and downplay the idea that maybe he did die with COVID or coronavirus being a contributing factor, that he tested negative on one test and then he tested positive, that he had diabetes. And some of the images I've seen circulating there on Facebook, I think even myself at times, I'm too fast, too quick to want to deny our environmental factors, viruses and different things that could have an impact. They're immune triggering. And I think that's the key here. Any virus can be immune triggering, and if we look at the effects that we're doing, the things that we're doing, we need to take on, think differently, take a different perspective. I stepped back and I was like, I don't want to use this child's death for any of my own personal, agendas or anything like that. So last night, I dwelled on it quite a bit, this young man's death, and how. So at one point in time, I was like, I won't talk about it. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to let the parents, grieve, the family grieve in peace. I know that other people were sharing it. I didn't want to join in on that. For a second or two, when I saw some of the images being shared about the article, first I was like, oh, wow, he had type 1 diabetes. Oh, and he tested negative. And that's what, I almost assumed. And instead of assuming that and sharing the image, I went and read the entire article, in which I actually jumped around at first. And ironically, today I even said, as I was jumping around looking at the article in his story, I had just, for some reason, skipped over the paragraph where it actually said that he had been diagnosed with moderate level autism. But I had said there was, that they retired his jersey and, family and community came together to respect and, give their condolences and just to honor this young man. But I just felt this morning, what? I kept going back and forth with the question, okay? Because when I started reading the article and I saw that he developed type 1 diabetes and most of his symptoms were of severe blood sugar dysregulation. Blood sugar was around 1,500 when he got to the hospital. All of his symptoms were really neurological, blood sugar related. All the clinical manifestation was more about diabetes than it was about any type of infectious illness. And yes, autoimmune conditions can be triggered or set off, or the final straw. The loaded gun may have been there, and the infection or any infection could be one that further triggers the development of an autoimmune condition. So we know that. But then the multisystem organ inflammation syndrome, Kawasaki disease. And, so just looking at that and looking it up, and then I found that, okay, diabetes appears in many of these children and individuals, even with coronavirus-linked Kawasaki disease. And so what it took me through was what's the link here? And so I immediately thought, and mind you, again, I didn't know this child had been diagnosed. For some reason, I had skipped that, but I had that assumption because of the Special Olympics jersey that was retired for him to honor his passing or honor him. And then, so I just asked myself why. But I also, one of the biggest things I want to show you is that so because his mother, the mother and father, the mother who adopted him was actually a nurse, they said things like he had no underlying medical conditions. But now, if we look at autism, you'll see the elevated serum levels of interleukin 17A in children with autism. That interleukin is primarily pushed out and produced by Th17 immune cells. And guess what? So while the medical community couldn't understand or say, why would Andre, they said he had no underlying medical conditions, but autism can oftentimes be, the brain damage can be initiated through an autoimmune condition attacking the brain. So having that knowledge and understanding that autism can be autoimmune in nature, I started asking these questions in Kawasaki disease, seeing some major autoimmune inflammatory type immune responses in Kawasaki disease, that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. Just putting all those things together, it took me down the rabbit hole of thinking, why did he develop type 1 diabetes? How does blood sugar spike so high? Could COVID have really been a factor in this? And really seeking out not to disregard this idea that COVID is this, harmless virus. It is still an immune trigger, period. That alone. Now, you can see, though, how almost harmless COVID can be to people who are not immunocompromised, who have a properly regulating, functioning immune system, because both Johnny, that would be the father, and the two sisters, all right? I guess one is his twin. The two sisters of Andre were swabbed, and they were infected with coronavirus as well. Now, Johnny's first test came back negative. His second test came back positive. I kind of said to myself, I'd like to see him try a third test, just best of 3, because right now it's 50-50 whether he really had the virus or not. But most viral tests, you can get a false negative where you could actually be positive, but the test came back negative. You're far less common to have a test come back positive, but not actually have that virus or that DNA, RNA within your system. So I'll read some more things here. Johnny and Andre's sisters, they came back positive. They only had mild fevers and a little bit of fatigue. No ill effects from the virus. So the virus, in those who have a properly functioning immune system, it's not but any virus can be an immune trigger that triggers the result that we see here with this child. All right, I want people to take away that. Dawn, who was in a hospital, Dawn, who was his mother, who was the nurse. Listen to this, folks. This is one of the things that just is just kind of, you have to question the whole medical system. But I love the fact that they actually did this, though. I love the fact that they did not force the mother to get tested. So the father, the two sisters tested positive, the son tested positive, but Dawn, the mother, who was the nurse, she refused to get tested because the hospital's policies would not have let her be there with her son if she was positive, even though he was in the COVID area of the hospital. If she tested positive, she would have had to leave the hospital, couldn't be there for her son. So I thank God that the hospital actually allowed her to refuse the test. So parents out there, members out there, you can refuse to get tested and be there for your family, okay? So I thank God that the hospital actually allowed them to do that. But you also have the question, are they really worried about making sure this virus doesn't spread if they're not willing, if you can just repeat? It just, whole another bag of worms there. Don't worry about that. I thank God that they actually let the mother be there by her son's side in his last few days. So 12 days in the hospital, Andre experienced issues with the brain, heart, lungs, kidneys. Again, that's symptomatic of multi-organ, multisystem inflammatory syndrome, such as Kawasaki disease. It says here, everything that they could do to fight to try and correct the coronavirus. This is what Johnny, the father, said. And this breaks my heart because it shows a lack of understanding, but it's not Johnny's fault. It's the system's fault. And something that came to me this morning was, why don't I look to the medical textbooks, okay, medical immunology. This is a textbook on immunology that medical physicians are supposed to read and use for schooling and their testing and everything. So we'll read that in a second. But everything that they could to fight to correct it, the coronavirus would find something else to attack. That's not the way it works. Coronavirus doesn't just go circulating and attacking. In fact, they've even seen this with measles infections, that it's not measles that does direct tissue injury, it's actually vitamin A deficiency as being one of the primary factors in severe illness and death in measles infections. It's not the measles virus that just runs rampant and decides to attack Andre worse than his sisters, Andre worse than his father. It is the status of Andre's immune system that allowed for a dysregulated immune response that ultimately took this child's life. It was not the virus. The virus was a trigger, but the virus isn't the cause of all of the systems of his body being attacked with inflammation and ultimately having type 1 diabetes induced. So just remember that. That's what breaks my heart, because now if I jump over here, because I was like, okay, why Kawasaki disease, type 1 diabetes, this child had autism, what's the connection? Every single one of those things. I already showed you IL-17A, which is produced by Th17 cells, is higher in the blood of autistic children. Not only that, severe vitamin D deficiency, which will be connected when we look at the immunological textbook, vitamin D deficiency in children or individuals, patients with Kawasaki disease, could be regulator of the development of Kawasaki disease. Downregulation of Th17 cells and the related cytokines in treatment of Kawasaki disease. Going on, vitamin D deficiency and diabetes type 1, especially inhibition of Th17 cells, regulates autoimmune diabetes in mice studies. Regulatory T cells, so a bunch of studies here, but listen to this. And this is something that this should break everybody's heart and frustrate everybody all get out, all right? We should all be frustrated. This entire medical textbook on immunology, all right? Half of a page on vitamins necessary for proper regulation of your immune response. So I just showed you multiple studies on Kawasaki disease and type 1 diabetes that see upregulation or dysregulation of Th17 T helper 17 cells, all right? Which is connected to type 1 diabetes, to Kawasaki disease, multi-inflammatory syndromes, multi-organ system inflammatory syndromes, and autism. Listen to this. So a half a page of vitamins. So if you think medical physicians are trained on whether a vitamin or mineral or nutrient or herb or mushroom, not a single mushroom is mentioned in here, not a single herb is mentioned in here, and their immunological supporting mechanisms. No, just talking about the immune system, and a half a page on a few, very, very few vitamins. They mention B9, B6, C, E, in general. They mention zinc, they mention iron, they mention and highlight vitamin A and vitamin D. Those are the only vitamins they mention in all of this textbook. Medical physicians and their capability of saving the lives of children and patients is woefully insufficient when it comes to what is necessary for the body to regulate the immune system. You guys get in my mindset here. This is what God showed me, and I pray that the parents, if they watch this, they would understand that I was ready to X out of that link of your son's article. But I dwelled on it last night. I dwelled on it. I kept asking the question, how did this virus or how did the child succumb to it? Why are we blaming COVID when we're not looking at why his brothers and sisters didn't get it? Not only that, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was, not only that, was that because they were, Dawn was a nurse, the mother was a nurse in a nursing home, so she continued care for a continuing care community. The family took more than the usual More than the usual precautions when the coronavirus started to spread across the U.S. After each shift, she'd take off her shoes at the door. Her husband would disinfect them. She'd go upstairs, take a shower. The family cleaned their surfaces, disinfecting wipes, wore masks, and they had to, when they had to leave the house and practice social distancing as much as possible. In fact, Andre, the child who died, was the only family member who didn't leave the house. That was huge to me. Do you see how their perspective? They want to change the environment, socially distance, stay at home, don't go anywhere, wear a mask, disinfect. But the person doing that more than anybody else probably got the virus. And then not only that, was the one doing all of the recommendations from the CDC and the medical community. The one doing that was the one who died. But the other family members going out in public, going out in the sunshine, I say that very specifically. Why? Vitamin D, listen to this. Vitamin A and vitamin D promote Th2 activity, especially of the mucosal surfaces, which are necessary to prevent systemic infection, but also it stimulates T regulatory activity, which is different than Th17 cells, and it actually downregulates Th17 cells. Vitamin A and vitamin D, which is given to us by God through the sun and some nutrition. Sun your mushrooms. You get amazing thousands of times more sun your mushrooms upside down before you eat them. Before you grill them. Guess what? You get a lot more vitamin D. Folks, was he deficient? That's what hung out. Was he deficient? One, probably because of nutrition. And granted, the dietary habits of autistic children is very difficult to control and direct. I understand that because I work with a lot of parents with children suffering with autism. So I understand nutrition is very difficult. But folks, get this. If vitamin A and vitamin D, maybe he wasn't getting enough vitamin D. Or what if we were to supplement with vitamin A and vitamin D with anybody who ever came in contact with somebody who had COVID-19 or those who test positive for COVID-19? Maybe we could improve the T regulatory activity of the immune response, downregulate the Th17 immune type responses, thus protecting children from type 1 diabetes as well as Kawasaki disease. Maybe that information right there that was in this medical textbook, that anybody who knows something about the way in which the immune system affects the development of many different conditions, and especially autism, Kawasaki disease, and type 1 diabetes, all immunological in nature. But they're not caused by viruses, they're caused by an immunological disruption and dysregulation. I hope you guys take away that right there. To me, so I thought to myself, I don't want to sit here and say, you know what, I'm not going to use this child's death for my agendas. I said, but if I can connect the dots, how could this child's death somehow bring about better understanding for other parents out there so that they can live in less fear of this virus? And the mainstream media's use of deaths promote fear. When if they were to do what I just did, why couldn't we be talking about I don't know because I don't have his blood work, but when you have the research that says Th17 and IL-17A, those inflammatory immune responses that promote autoimmune conditions, that promote Kawasaki disease, that promote type 1 diabetes, that promote the development and can be causative in all of those things, autism, Kawasaki, and type 1 diabetes. Was he deficient? Had anybody checked that? If they did, then yes, I just repeated what they'd already done. But if they didn't, then what I feel God showed me today is something that we may be able to utilize to save and protect other children from a same fate. And maybe adults, maybe other people. And then there's this. Th17 cytokines and vaccine-induced immunity. Premature infants have a higher risk of developing autism when they're vaccinated. Vaccines are known to initiate Th17 inflammatory immune responses. Autoimmune models, modeling autoimmune conditions. I'm reading directly from this research study. Most autoimmune models deliver antigens and adjuvants which are used in vaccines, such as complete Freudin's adjuvant or pertussis toxin that is in the DTP vaccine or any of the whooping cough vaccines, to induce inflammatory disease phenotypes, to cause autoimmune conditions. They use what is in vaccines to cause autoimmune conditions. And by what mechanism do they cause that? Further pertussis toxins can also induce pathogenic Th17 inflammatory responses in the setting of vaccinations. These studies highlight the need for detailed characterization of adjuvants prior to inclusion in vaccine strategies, since the delicate balance of the IL-17 seen in individuals with autism, Kawasaki disease, which hepatitis B vaccine has been shown to initiate Kawasaki disease in case studies. Vaccine-induced immunity may define tissue destruction or immune protection. Guys, I gotta go. Love you all, appreciate you all. This is this was this morning. This was today. I had to get it out there. Take this information, utilize it to the best of your ability. Dwell on it, read it. I'll get the links out there in the future. Did we do TWD at all? Yes. So if you TWD on the Facebook comments, this does not work on YouTube. YouTube is there's a link in the discussion. You can utilize this information, get these things, and you can read it. But right there, 1/2 of a page in an immunological medical textbook could hold the answers to lowering the risk for the development of Kawasaki disease, type 1 diabetes, or severe coronavirus illness. And doing what they say, wearing masks, sanitizing everything, and staying home is not the answer. That's what God was saying to me the last several days. That's why I couldn't delete the article. That was not the right approach. Though those parents were doing the best they could with the information they were told to believe. They were doing the best they could. They had guaranteed to have moral and ethical and good hearts, wanting to protect their children, wanting to protect the community. That's why people wear the masks many times. That's why people listen to the medical community. That's why they listen to the CDC, because they believe the information coming out would be something that could save the lives. But that child's example is a perfect example of how that is insufficient, woefully insufficient. So if that didn't work, a child who never left the home of any of his siblings and family members, it didn't work. So something else needs to be found to save the lives of people. Share that, and we'll save lives. I love you all.